Hey, all. Ron here from Military Images with today's episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today's story is driven by this photograph, which is part of a grouping of images, all portraits of the same soldier that have been collected by a private individual. And the portraits in the collection are all of the same man. This is Thomas Plunkett of the 21st Massachusetts Infantry. It's an image that you may know. It has been often reproduced, and it's really compelling. The moment you see it, you notice that his arms are missing. He has empty sleeves. One of those sleeveless arms is draped on the colors, the national colors, the stars and stripes. And together, they tell a story. Plunkett, an Irish immigrant, comes to the United States as a boy. He settles with his family in Massachusetts in the town of West Boylston. And when the war comes, he enlists in the 21st Massachusetts Infantry. He proves himself early on as an able fighter and also as a compassionate comrade. At Fredericksburg in 1862, he's in the rear of the ranks as they are attacking Confederate forces along Marye's Heights, along the crest of the ridge. He's in the back of the ranks, making sure that there's no stragglers coming from the regiment. And at one point, he sees the colors are shot, the color bearer is shot, the flag topples to the ground. Plunkett drops his gun, he grabs the flag, holds it aloft. They're moving forward. A shell fired from Confederate artillery explodes nearby. A fragment rips into one of his arms, literally tearing it off, ricochets off his chest vest pocket where he has a book that he's picked up earlier that day, a souvenir, a war trophy, if you will. The shell ricochets off of the book, goes through his other arm near his wrist, making that wrist and his hand mostly gone. And so the story goes, he props up the flag pole with a foot and tries to keep it aloft. The colonel of the regiment comes over, cuts off his accoutrements and sends him to the rear. Weak, loss of blood. He finally collapses and is carried to Fredericksburg, where surgeons amputate both of his arms, or I should say, the remnants of his arms. The story goes on and on from there until his death in 1885. He is celebrated for his patriotism, for his courage. He's a regular at reunions and other functions in Massachusetts. During the course of my research, fact-checking all this information, you start to stumble upon additional information. And one of them is the story that I want to tell you today. It's not often told. And it started out with me finding a reference on Ancestry.com to a newspaper article, which got my curiosity up. So here's the story. 2 months before Fredericksburg and the events that cost him the use of his arms, Plunkett is in the Battle of South Mountain, which is part of the Antietam Campaign. That maelstrom activity and the din of battle, he and his 21st Massachusetts are moving back. They're withdrawing a little bit. And as they're moving back, Plunkett stumbles upon a Union officer who was propped up against a barn. This officer is sitting up against the barn. He clearly has a wound in his shoulder. This officer cries out for water, and Plunkett stops and attends to this wounded officer. gives him a drink of water. The officer is grateful. And during the brief conversation that ensues, Plunkett asks the officer where he's from, and the officer says, Ohio. In the din and the chaos of battle, the conversation probably doesn't go much further than that. The officer has his drink of water. He's comfortable. Plunkett, still with both arms, 2 months before Fredericksburg, continues on his way. And the episode largely disappears. It fades into the recesses, probably of both men's memories. So that's 1862, September of 1862. Flash forward 15 years to August 23rd, 1877. There's a new president in the White House, and that new president is on a tour of New England. You recall that I told you Plunkett is a resident of Massachusetts. By that time, he has received the Medal of Honor for Fredericksburg. He's now an older man. He's dressed in civilian clothes. He still has his sleeveless arms where the hands and arms once were from Fredericksburg. And he attends the speech by the president who was on this New England tour and stops by the neighboring town of Worcester in Massachusetts. And so here's Plunkett in the crowd. The president comes up, makes a few remarks, and Plunkett is standing there listening to the president speak. And he looks at the man's face and he thinks, I know this guy. Where have I met this guy before? Rolls it around in his mind, and he realizes it's the same officer that he gave a drink of water to at South Mountain. So after the president concludes his remarks, Plunkett walks up, introduces himself, and queries the president, talking about some of the events, the canteen of water that he shared. And the president, Rutherford Burchard Hayes, nods in agreement, realizing that, in fact, it was Plunkett that gave him a drink of water on that day in September 1862. So the two men are reacquainted for just a moment, again, 15 years after the battle. And according to a recollection of this, an account of this that's recorded in a centennial history of the town of West Boylston. This book dates from 1908. According to the story, President Hayes reaches over and grabs Plunkett. Hayes, using both of his good hands, he grabs Plunkett by the remnants of his arm and shakes it as only one soldier could greet another. And so there you have this little known, largely forgotten story of the Civil War that occurs in August of 1877, when Tom Plunkett, pictured here, meets President Rutherford B. Hayes in Worcester, Massachusetts. So that's today's story from the research trail. I will see you with a new episode tomorrow. Take care. Bye.